Thank you. Thank you very much. So appreciate everyone coming. Thank you to our panelists. There's a lot going on here. This is quite a fascinating gathering of people and cultures and discussion. And I am Cynthia Littleton, co-editor-in-chief of Variety. I was very flattered to be asked to be part of this event, so I'm really just grateful to the organizers and everyone. And I'm grateful to have been asked to do a panel on a very substantive topic about culture as an economic driver, culture as a way of leveraging heritage to the benefit of both the domestic country as well as exposure internationally. So I'm very excited. We have a fantastic panel of participants here that each bring really specific personal background to what I hope will be a lively discussion of the topic, cultural innovation as the new oil. That's a very exciting prism to talk about culture and content and all that is going on in the world. So with that said, I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we are going to just dive right in. Right next to me here is Lord Ed Faizi. He is an advisor and cultural commentator in the UK, and he is a member of the House of Lords. Ed, thank you for coming. Next to Ed is Laura Kalanen, founding partner of Upstart Kolab, based in New York City, working on impact investing. And Laura has a long resume of working with major foundations, major arts organizations in the United States, and will bring a lot of great insight and anecdotal discussion to this conversation. Next to Laura is Hanouf Houtham, General Manager of the Innovation Department at the Ministry of Culture for Saudi Arabia. And being in charge of innovation, that is a big job. And in my discussion with Hanouf, she has a big job, and she has a bundle of energy and excitement and enthusiasm for what she's doing. And that's half the battle, folks, is finding people that love and so want to promote and work. And our conversation backstage was really inspiring, and we'll draw some of that out as well. And next to Hanouf is Émmanuel Hugues. How'd I do? All right, my French pronunciation is about as good as my Arabic, so forgive me, folks, but I do try. Émmanuel is CEO of Combat Media, which we're going to learn a lot about. Does a lot of different things in the media and culture and festival space, and also has a long resume of working with French arts institutions, and also ran agency France Presse, which is one of the world's major wire services, full of journalists. So thank you all for coming. And for being part of this, I want to just get right into it. Cultural innovation as the new oil. Saying that in Saudi Arabia has a lot of weight and meaning. And I throw it out to anybody who would like to answer, is how in the cultural innovation as the new oil is an interesting construct. I would love people's thoughts, big picture, before we get into specifics. Big picture, how, from your range of experience, how do you see that working, especially given the content and media marketplace that we all know has been turbocharged by the advent in the last 10 years of global streaming? It has changed everything. It has exported cultures in ways that you couldn't quickly, and with entertainment products that can do so much. And it's so interesting that this whole conference is about exactly that. So I'm going to stop talking. I would love people to jump in and have thoughts on how you could take this concept and really express it in the practical application of building arts and cultural institutions and seeding artists in Saudi Arabia.
So for me, as an impact investor, this notion of cultural innovation as the new oil, it's very evocative, and it brings up three things in particular. The first is the notion of creativity and culture as the ultimate natural resource. It's green, it's clean, it's regenerative. You don't run out of it, it's infinite. Creativity begets more creativity. So in that way, it's very much falls into the notion of the ultimate natural resource. Not every community has natural beauty. You're not always in a place that's next to a desert or a mountain or a seaside, but every community has its culture and heritage, and that is the ultimate natural resource for that community and that place. As you mine creativity, you're tapping into new potential and new talent that you might not be accessing in other aspects of your economy. The second thing for me is that creativity and culture, they bridge the old and the new. They bridge tradition and they connect it to innovation, to streaming services, and to all of the new ways that technology allows us to communicate and express ourselves. So the old things, the stories and the food, the music, it's still with us, but we just share it in different ways. We share the stories through video games. We share the food through your grandmother's recipe goes over social media. So the tradition is able to move more broadly, and it's a way for us to share who we are with other people because the technology, the innovation makes that more possible. And then I guess as the last point, you know, really good investors and really good business leaders, they don't just think about the next fiscal quarter. They think generationally. Yeah. They think way, way into the future. And I think that creativity and culture is all about that. The most powerful things we have from the past, they're our drawings and our stories, and the idea that this is the jewel, the palaces, the gardens, the spaces that have been created in the past, this is the jewel that we pass on to our grandchildren. That as a driver of value, I think is core to creativity and culture, and that's what makes a great business. Not thinking about the next three months, thinking about the next 10, 20, 50 years.
And the pipe, to your point, and to the work that Hanouf is doing, the pipeline. The pipeline in any business. If you don't have that next generation. Iemmanuel or Ed, yeah. Can you, from practical example in your businesses, can you think of examples where a cultural institution, a festival, a television show, a movie, really had impact beyond the people that it employed, but had impact in a region or a sector? Anything come to mind?
Over to you, Iemmanuel.
Okay. Before answering you about a specific example, I would like to come back a little bit about the
Sure,
general,
please do.
Yeah.
Sorry, jumping ahead.
So as we know, of course, oil will stop one day, and of course, culture could last forever. But culture at the same time is not just based on social issues, but economic issues, and it could stop, it could decline, or it could grow. And I think that if the economy of culture could grow, it could gather different things. Of course, the first one is that you should have a marketplace where you have offer and demand, and it depends on education, offer of the creators and demands of the consumers, and depends a lot on education issues. The second one, it should be a right balance between what is mass consumption and mass culture, and also innovation and creation. If the market is just dedicated to mass issue and popular issue, and there's no avant-garde creativity, and there's a question of diversity and dynamism of this market.
And the people moving forward.
Yeah.
Right.
It should be at the same time the first thing I would like to mention is that it should be at the same time a great balance between what is import and what is export. If they are not a very local and domestic proposition on the cultural market, it could be a real problem. So it should be a right balance between what is export and what is import, and domestic or local proposition is really important. And the last one, and I would come back maybe to a specific example, it should be also a real diversity in proposition. It should not be a market just dedicated to music, to heritage, to museum, and so on, and to make the links that you mentioned between the other types of economic models with fashion, with culinary, with tourism, and so on. The market should be full of different types of productions, not just one museum or one music or one performing arts and so on. So that's, for me, the basic conditions to have that oil or art or culture could be the oil of tomorrow.
Arts in particular thrive on diversity. They thrive on bringing, we see that at Variety all the time. You bring creative people together, you get an absolute spark. Ed, and then I'm going to ask Hanouf on some of the hands-on efforts that you are doing, because there's some fascinating work going. But Ed, I don't know if you want to plug into any of that, or even talk about sort of the transformation of London. London, the UK in general, but London specifically as a filming hub. There's as many Hollywood movies shooting in London right now as there are in Los Angeles.
That's right. So I had an unusual job in the British government. I was both the culture minister and the tech minister at exactly the same time, and people couldn't really work out what the link was between the two. And it led to two interesting points. The link is that tech is actually driven by culture. If you think about how consumers engage with tech, the vast majority is in order to get cultural content in its widest sense, whether it's watching an influencer on TikTok or streaming Netflix. You want fast broadband, you want a great phone. That's what you tend to use it for. So culture drove tech. But the link between culture and tech for me as a minister was absolutely fascinating. The first was to persuade my colleagues in government that culture was important for our economy. And the creative industries, which really encompass all that is culture, from museums right through to film and video games, during my time as a minister, grew 3 times more than the British economy, at a time when the British economy was actually growing, which it no longer is, but that's a whole other point. So I kept trying to say to ministers, you have to understand how important culture is to your economy. And I would say to David Cameron, it is just as important for you to fill, David Cameron, then the Prime Minister, it's just as important for you to visit the film set of James Bond as it is for you to visit a car factory, because James Bond is giving you not only hundreds of millions of pounds in investment in very, very high-skilled jobs, it's giving you soft power, and it's giving you a ripple effect into the British economy. This conference, I think, is unique in putting kind of the business case for culture at its heart, and it was fascinating to see the Minister for Industry and the Minister for Investment here opening the conference. You know, I got George Osborne, our Finance Minister, to meet the team from Star Wars in order to do a specific deal to get Star Wars to be made in the UK in order to generate money for the British economy. So culture is in and of itself an economic good. But the interesting thing about culture, and where innovation is very interesting and relevant, is I always found the tech community obviously much more innovative. And that is because the tech community understood that at the heart of their proposition was reinvention. Yeah. You know, I was a minister in 2010 when the smartphone was just beginning to become ubiquitous, and they were the ones that picked up and said, this will change how you hire a taxi. Really boring thing to think about, but really important. And for me, the challenge for the cultural establishment, if you like, is innovation. There needs to be this conversation between tech and culture. There is too much in culture that sets everything in aspic. You can walk into a museum in Britain today, and you could have walked in from the mid-19th century and still feel like you're having a comfortable and similar experience. So there needs to be cultural innovation, and that's why I'm so pleased to see that we have an innovation specialist from the Ministry of Culture here, because we don't have an innovation minister in Britain for culture, which perhaps we need.
I think that goes to your point, and I can't speak to the UK, but in the United States, still, 20 years in, it's in California. The northern part of California has the tech and the money and a ton of innovation and creativity. Southern California has Hollywood, which, I'm being very honest, Hollywood is in the throes of business transformation. Hollywood is struggling. There's no question about it right now. It is trying to reinvent, it's trying to remap how it goes to market in real time while still making movies. And it is just, there are closer ties than ever before, but the difficulty of those two sectors to understand each other is really fascinating. And as a longtime network executive said, wireless is useless if it's hitless. And that means Netflix could have had the most wonderful service in the world, but if they didn't have anything that people wanted to watch, it wouldn't be the world changer that it is.
Absolutely.
So that is Hanouf. Let's talk about, you have, as Ed said, you have a very interesting role, kind of a fascinating remit to do. And in talking with you, you have so many things going on. Let's start, though, at the very top in terms of when you took on this role. How did you define your job and what your goals and purpose were?
Thank you so much. So the first thing we did was we defined what cultural innovation meant, right? So, and the way we defined it is it's the dynamic process of harnessing creativity to address challenges in the cultural sector. But how do we do that? Through co-creation and collaboration with the stakeholders who are mostly affected by gaps within the cultural ecosystem. We've created a beautiful space called the gray area. And what we do within the gray area is once we identify these challenges, we like to turn negatives into infinity, right? So we take these challenges, we turn them into themes. We then have a pillar at MOCX called insight and the other one called engagement. You cannot go to experimentation and ideation before fulfilling these two pillars. When we talk about insight, we are gathering research, we're doing all of this, we're identifying the gaps, but we also speak to the stakeholders who are greatly affected by these gaps. We get their insights, we unify our insights together, government, private sector, and the third sector. After that, we go into engagement. Engagement, our mandate here is to cultivate and nurture cultural innovation communities, right? It's great that we come up with ideas, but you need to ensure that there's a system that is sustainable. And our job at MOCX is to ensure that there is a methodology for any creative in Saudi, or hopefully beyond Saudi, can be an innovator just by using a tool in their hands, can take it from an idea all the way to pitch, all the way to delivery, right? So the methodology is key, but how are you going to measure the impact?
Measurement is important.
Measurement is important.
Let me ask you, though, can you give us an example of one of those gaps? Something that the gray area, which, to be clear, is a gathering. You do it a couple times a year?
We do it 2 to 3 times a year.
Gathering?
It's a gray area workshop. And as I said, we invite the stakeholders who are mostly affected by these challenges. And we bring in the decision makers from the Ministry of Culture to co-create these solutions with the stakeholders in real time. Everything concludes in one session. It culminates into a Shark Tank. And the decision makers basically qualify these ideas. MOCX then takes these ideas, works with the creators, and I need to be very clear about it. The ministry does not own these ideas. The IP stays with the creators. So we protect their creativity. We enable and create opportunities for them to solve these challenges. And it's also empowering them to take ownership of these solutions themselves, where the government role is to de-risk these solutions for greater impact for them. An anchor example of this, one of our themes was, how can you sustain underground, street, and emerging culture in Saudi, right? And as government, I was talking to you, Cynthia.
That's a bold statement.
That's a very
for
bold
any government,
statement.
let alone, I mean, that if...
Yes, sorry, but I mean, our demographic is unique, right? More than 70% of the population is under 35 years old. We also have this great identity in Saudi. We are contemporary traditionalists, right? And which goes to exactly what you were saying. So how do you do this, right? How do you bring people together with this mindset? That theme, in 5 hours, generated 120 ideas. Then we synthesized them. One of the ideas that came out was brilliant. It's called, back then, you know, the fad with metaverses and all of that. So as innovation, we're like, you know, metaverses are not really relevant anymore, but we found...
You pivoted.
Yeah, we found a brilliant opportunity, right? The largest gaming population in the world is in Saudi Arabia.
Where you
right?
have young men.
Where you have young men and women, of course.
Yes,
and
of course.
So how do you build this connection? How do you create this new community, right, of cultural gamers? How do you do that? So we co-created this virtual cultural playground called Kown. In Arabic, Kown is a universe or world. In English, we spelt it Kown, a kingdom of our own, for creatives. So imagine your Six Flags or that, but engineers haven't designed it. Creatives and artists and architects designed it. And so this platform was the ultimate form of experimentation of what how can you elevate cultural consumption in a sustainable way for the future, forever, and how do you also anchor and archive these beautiful artworks, and how do you give the largest platform in the world to emerging creatives, right? So that was kind of the solution that came out. And an example of this, I was telling Cynthia, it bridges the gap between the virtual and the physical. So one of the challenges we had is like, how are you going to get culinary arts into this playground, right? What are you going to do? So we're like, hold on. Culinary arts are like, no, let them grow the farm, let them pick the ingredients, and then we'll send the ingredients to Saudi chefs in Saudi. They'll prototype the dish, they'll name the dish under the creative, and by the end of the year, you get recipe books generated from the creative population. So that's just an example of the things that we do at MOCX, and ensuring that cultural innovation is not just services and products, but it's a mindset, right, that will continue.
And that...
This is why Saudi is so far ahead of the UK, because I tried for years to get David Cameron to make high-end restaurants part of my portfolio as part of the creative industries, and he refused. You can probably tell that I like going to high-end restaurants.
But I think truly, and the world, I got my Hollywood blinders on, but the world is music, fashion, architecture. I've been impressed by how much architecture has, you know, the importance of design and architecture, and sort of the spaces that you're in are important. And Hanouf, all of what you described is, if I'm not mistaken, was put into motion by the Saudi 2030 vision, which is, in my short time here, I have been enormously impressed at. It just feels like there is a groundswell here to reach that goal, which is, as we know, is 5 years away, and I know has been in the works for a while. And let me ask you very, very candidly, has that been, is the intention behind what you discussed, has that been difficult culturally for Saudis? Is that appreciation of arts, is that something that appreciates the appreciation of the potential of arts to drive so much more? Has that been something that took some getting used to for the sort of the larger government population, the larger population here, or do you feel like there is that spirit of innovation and driving to what is new and what is next?
So we're very fortunate that Saudi Arabia, I mean, we have 13 regions in Saudi. Each one has a very unique cultural identity, right? So you can't unify Saudi culture because everywhere you go, it's a set of traditions, it's a set of all of that. So culture was always there, art was always there, right? It's just that we didn't communicate it, but it was always there, and it's part of our identity as contemporary traditionalists, right? We explore, we identify, we create, and Saudi Arabia has evolved so much that we're not really phased, right? We're used to the transformation. We're used to evolving. We're used to being part of this evolution, right? So challenges, there weren't challenges. It was just like getting people together, right? Bringing them. So the gray area, that was our prototype.
Gotcha.
How can we create this beautiful space where everyone can come together and solve these challenges, right? Together. That's the mindset. So honestly, to tell you the truth, there weren't challenges. There were just, because we're innovators, so we just try and test. And everything we've been doing is learning by doing.
And the impact of Saudi's Gen Z and Gen Alpha, probably cannot be overstated in terms of this generation is raised in a completely different world than even some of their, older brothers and sisters in terms of social media and everything. And so, I mean, I can imagine that with that youthful energy. Emmanuel, let me ask you, you've had some practical experience. Obviously, you have had, high-level jobs in various French cultural and arts institutions. More recently, you've been running a company called Combat Media. You've been producing podcasts and music festivals and stuff. What has, in launching Combat Media and bringing, projects and festivals and just the things we've been talking about, starting them from scratch, where have you found from France or Western Europe or whatever perspective, where have you found the speed bumps or the hurdles to getting successful and sustainable activities that can go and have that great ripple effect in the larger economy?
We have started our reflection just before the COVID, and we have thought that music was probably one of the sectors that we could grow. But at the same time, during the COVID, people thought that live music and so on, it was finished. And after the COVID, the market could decrease a lot, and new experience will challenge the live music. I would mention that music is the first consumption and the first cultural practice in the world. So it means that the market is still growing. And inside this market, ticketing is growing over 10% each year. And it was even more after the COVID, because after the COVID, all the people wanted to have the live experience. And you talk about gathering people. There are not a better experience than making a festival to gather people, thousands of people facing a scene and facing musicians. So we have decided to concentrate our efforts on our investment about live music, and by creating and purchasing festivals in France, because in France we have a good practice, a good experience with Festival de Cannes, Festival d'Avignon, which is not, of course, musical festival.
Right.
We know that. So this is for us, our main challenge. It's music festival.
I want to talk about, I can't believe this is such a good topic, and our time is racing.
It's not long enough.
No, it's definitely not long enough. I want to talk about funding models, because I want to be very respectful that this is a business conference, and that the task I was given from the organizers was really to get into specifics. Again, actually, I'm going to start with you, Lora, because you've had so much experience, and your experience in the US is so different than I'm guessing even the UK or France. Can you talk about sort of how you, as you look at different opportunities in impact investing, how do you evaluate it as an investment and evaluate, what's the model? Is it seed money? Is it equity? Those kinds of questions.
Well, I'm still thinking about some of the comments that Hanouf made a minute ago, and how similar your experience has been to what we're learning and observing and contributing to in the US. So obviously, if you make art, it's all about originality and distinctiveness. That is not helpful if you're trying to encourage and facilitate investment.
Right. You want to make widgets. You can get one good one and then keep going.
So the three things that we have seen to be really important if you're trying to create the ecosystem that will facilitate investment: don't focus on training the artists and the designers and the creative people. They're brilliant, they're out there, they will come forward. You need to train the lawyers and the accountants and the project managers to be savvy and expert about the particular needs of the creative industry. So that's the first one. You do have to think about your talent pipeline, but I'm not worried about the creative talent. I'm worried about the lawyers who have the copyright expertise. And that gets me to my second bit, which is it's not so much investing in creative spaces is valuable and important, but we're also seeing a great need to invest in the plumbing and the infrastructure that will allow creative business to grow, which has to do with intellectual property protection. We're looking at a business now that facilitates copyright registration. We've invested in a business that facilitates payments online to creators. I was flabbergasted when we started to look at this company, which is called Breaker. They're a creator marketing platform. I didn't believe it was hard to pay people online in this day and age, but apparently that's really been holding things back in the creator economy. And then the third piece is, collecting royalties and making sure people get paid. It's all of this kind of boring stuff.
The boring
but it's absolutely
back-end
necessary.
stuff.
And then the third piece I would observe is, while the creative work needs to be distinctive and original, the business model of the investment opportunity needs to be familiar, and in being familiar, it will feel safe. Investors get very weary if they have to understand something new. They like to see pattern recognition, because that makes them feel like they can understand what the risk profile of the opportunity is, and then they can make their determination about whether the return will offset that risk, and then they'll move ahead. If you need to teach them a new business model, it's very problematic.
That's a lot of meetings.
Marketplaces and platforms that connect, business to business or business to consumer, if you're able to lean into familiar business models, even if the activity is creative, it really facilitates the investment.
And one thing you mentioned when we were speaking earlier was about having to get over the idea in the arts community that profit is a dirty word, that profit is somehow not conducive to art, that art is this sort of separate thing and the commercial considerations. Can you talk about how that maybe has changed, or you'd like to see it change in the UK?
Yeah, I don't think it has changed, and that's the problem. I thought what Laura just said was absolutely fascinating, and of course, also incredibly boring. And I say that in a complimentary way, because no politician would sit down and talk about the plumbing for the creative industries. But you are absolutely right. You don't see the problems at a high level in a ministry of what it's like to be a sole practitioner in the creative industries and the kind of hurdles you face in protecting your IP, getting good lawyers and so on. We used to, funnily enough, do that for the tech community. We didn't do it for the arts community, and perhaps that's because the vibe, if you like, that you get from the arts is that they're not interested in making money, and I find it very...
They want to starve.
I find it very frustrating. I sit on the board of Tate, and I hope I'm not talking out of school here, but Tate has the largest membership. Tate is the big modern art museum in London, has the biggest membership of any national museum in the country. And when I look at it, people are joining Tate so that they can get free access to our paid exhibitions. But I look at it and I think, if that was a startup, if you said you've got 170,000 people who are interested in contemporary art and prepared to pay a certain amount of money, if you were a startup and you went to an investor, they would say, if I give you X million, how quickly can you get to 1 million subscribers? What do you need to do? And that mentality does not exist, in my view, in the publicly subsidized arts. The publicly subsidized arts are incredibly important because actually they are a talent pipeline. Publicly subsidized theatre can become very commercially successful theatre. It's a really important talent pipeline. It's a really important neutral, safe space. But the quid pro quo of that is that you don't get that innovation mentality, that how do I maximize what I'm doing to make a real impact, which you have to do as a business, otherwise you go under.
All right, I am going to just press it just for like 2 minutes here. I would love to know, there's so many things we could talk about. I would love to know the importance of, you mentioned James Bond, Emmanuel, I'm thinking, you mentioned the Cannes Film Festival, Jean-Luc Godard, Brigitte Bardot. How important is it, and let me start with you, Hanu, how important is it for you to have Saudi artists, architects, designers, fashion design, how important is it for them to be successful on the world stage for this, for this larger campaign about arts and in the ecosystem. Is that important to you, that there be sort of world recognition that Saudi artists have so much to offer?
Yes, of course. I mean, but it's equally important that they have a sustainable, empowering ecosystem at home, right?
Yes.
So when that happens, you immediately get the international audience's attention, right? Because
Right.
you see how, and we've been doing this for years now, right? We have 11 verticals at the Ministry of Culture focusing primarily on ensuring that the local sector in culture is thriving, right? Being in an international audience is equally important because you're part of the same dialogue. You're part of the same world, really, of culture. So I think the past 5-7 years, we've demonstrated that. If you see us at the Venice Biennale, for
Yes,
example,
so many
right?
exhibitions, yeah.
But also, more importantly, is we have our own kind of cultural identity in which we are sharing with the world today. And I'd like to just give an example of the Islamic Arts Biennale, right? This is part and parcel of our identity, which now the whole world is learning about and coming to visit it in Jeddah.
And can change perceptions,
Of
can
course.
change misperceptions.
Of course.
Sure,
So
through art.
this Biennale showed us that it is the convener of global institutions and local ones under one venue for one theme, and it became universal, right? So our culture is universal by default. So we are already global, we're already all over the world. It's just, you know.
And if I could just pick up on
Okay,
that.
and then we'll wrap up.
Authenticity is the key to global spread. And if you think of the Pixar film from maybe 8 years ago, Coco, which told a story that was set in Mexico, the reason it became a box office runaway hit in China, a completely different culture, is because it was authentic and it told a deeply felt family story. So to become more global, you actually need to dial in to what is uniquely your own.
The specific can become universal, and to Emmanuel's point, Coco also had great songs. We could go on another 35 minutes, but they're going to throw us off the stage. Thank you all so much for being here and listening. Thank you all for your thoughts. Really appreciate it, and more to come. All right.
Thank you.